Do we have any apologies for absences?
Apologies received from Councillor Harkness, and Councillor Williamson's here as substitute, and apologies have also been received from Councillor Holbin.
Thank you. Any urgent items? Declarations of interest by members? Are there any public questions?
None received, Chair.
Thank you. Are we all in agreement with the previous meeting minutes? Yep. Thank you. Which takes us on to item 6, which is the land adjacent to the grapes in Lees. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. This application relates to the existing public house known as the Grapes Pub on St John Street. Oh, all right. The application's for 3 new dwellings within a portion of the existing car park. The application is recommended for approval subject to the conditions set out in the reports and subject to the completion of a Section 106 contribution for 12,900 for 43 trees to be planted off-site. Members' attention is drawn to the late list where there is an additional consultation comment from Saddleworth Parish Council and a correction to paragraph 12.5 and 12.8 of the report relating to the use of the existing car park. The site lies in the Hayes Conservation Area and the Grapes Public House is Grade 2 listed. The surrounding uses around the site are all residential. The proposed house type is shown on the screen. It consists of 3 dwellings in a terraced row. This slide shows the proposed street scene of what the development would look like. You've got the grapes to the left and the proposed development to the right. And this slide shows the photos from the site visit that was undertaken on the 21st of September 2023. In terms of neighbour notification, a site notice was posted outside the site, 37 letters were sent and a press notice was published in the MEN News. Prior to today, no objections had been received. However, this afternoon we received 10 objections raising primarily highway safety concerns. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. Do any members have questions for the officer? Yep, Councillor Davis.
Regarding the 106 contribution, is that to replace trees that are already there? And if I can come back on that, another point.
Yeah, it's for 13.4 in the report. It says that there's 40 trees to be removed and 28 conifers, so there's 12 to be replaced. There's 12 at the 3-to-1 policy that we require, so that's 36. 12 conifers at a 1-to-1 replacement, so that equals 28. So yeah, the trees that are to be replaced will be off-site.
So when we're talking about a 106 payment here, would there have been a 106 payment what the development would have been asked for anyway to do the development? Does that make sense?
No, I'm not quite sure, sorry.
Well, there's a 106 payment for the trees, which I get, I understand that, because we've discussed this with other things previously, haven't we? So, but the point is, though, so there's a 106 payment for the trees, but would there be a 106 payment if there was no trees to be removed to make up for certain things, if you know, like we normally do with other developments?
I'll take it. Answer is no, because it's only for 3 dwellings. So things like affordable housing, public open space and that kind of thing, you only tend to incur Section 106 contributions for those when you're talking about 10 or more dwellings. But obviously when it's talking about something around trees, where you're replacing something that is being lost through development, that can apply to any size of development. And in this case, it's necessary to make the development acceptable.
Yeah, okay, thanks for explaining. I understand the trees, but the other point, you know, with it being a small development, okay, thanks.
Thank you. Any further questions for the officer? No. We'll move on to the speakers. So I have one objector, which is Councillor Helen Bishop, who's here as a resident. So welcome. You'll have 3 minutes, and the clerk will tell you 30 seconds prior when your time is up. Thank you. You can sit down and do it. Yeah, it's fine.
Hi. Yeah, so traffic congestion and parking conditions in the Hakens Conservation Area and neighbouring residential streets are already at critical level. The pub comprises of approximately 60 tables outside and in. That's an average of 4 seats per table, capacity of approximately 240 people at any one time. These tables are all used for food and live entertainment, sports, weddings, christenings, etc., not just for drinking, and therefore adequate car parking spaces are essential. The proposed development would see a reduction from 29 spaces currently to just 16 and not 17 as the application claims. 3 of those spaces are cordoned off by the pub for landlord staff use. 2 of the remaining 13 being retained are commonly underwater due to poor drainage, bringing the remaining number down to around 11 at certain times. As well as regular use as a dining venue to people from far and wide, the pub also advertises and frequently hosts large-scale functions such as funerals, christenings, wedding receptions, etc. On these occasions, the current car park is actually not big enough and customers already overspill onto residential roads nearby. This will lead to an inevitable inability to provide the facilities needed for a pub this size. In order to pass this, there should have been some sort of intervention to combat the current highway safety issue, but no scheme has been forthcoming. Passing this will be a smack in the face to those who have been campaigning for years for action to be taken to make the roads around Medlock Way safer. There are 2 large primary schools down the cul-de-sac that this is off. We have about 600 cars a day trying to get that down this particular avenue. There are more than adequate planning material matters on which to refuse this application. It's in the grounds of a listed building with a wealth of history as a coach house and inn, and is part of a wider conservation area that should be protected from this type of overdevelopment. For this reason, along with the highways issues, it was unanimously recommended for refusal by Saddleworth Parish Council months ago, whose report should be available in the pack. The site borders the parish boundary and the conservation area straddles it. I, as a resident, have had no letter regarding this application, and neither have other residents that I've spoken to. Even the residential care nursing home directly next door does not appear to have been consulted, even though their residents will be directly impacted by the noise of the building work. I have witnessed more than once blue lights being prevented from accessing the home for over 15 minutes due to the traffic chaos.
30 seconds left.
Okay. The Punch pub chain could at least have put something in the local press or had an open day at the pub for residents to view their plans, but there has been nothing. The recent peer review made it very clear that the council needs to do much more to embed a resident focus through everything it does, and for it to be member-led. As a resident, I ask the committee members to use this opportunity to make sure that this is the start of a new area of community engagement and refuse or defer these applications, as our authorities elsewhere have rightly done for similar applications by the same pub chain. That's it.
Thank you. Just to remind everybody that you are allowed to ask the resident questions. However, the resident can't ask questions to members. Any questions for the resident? Yep, Diane. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm just trying to judge from this map, and I've just found it. I was going to ask you about the map, but anyway, you mentioned about. I weren't sure. Did you say there were 2 primary schools down there? So
Hayward Zion and St Edwards. I think Hayward Zion has about 300 odd pupils, and Hayward Zion has 200. Sorry, the other way around. St Edwards has about 200 odd pupils. Hayward Zion 300 odd. So that's about 600 pupils going down Medlock Way there, as you can see.
yeah.
So they commonly turn off St John Street onto Medlock Way, or they come down from Beckett Street in the other direction through a really tight chicane, and it causes bedlam every morning and every evening. But again, I mean, the bigger point is the loss of the car parking spaces for the pub, because they're going to be displaced then onto the streets. And, you know, it's just going to inflame the situation more.
Yeah, I wanted to can I come back on that point to ask about the car park? So you said there was a nursing home near there. do people, when they visit, do they park on that car park? Is that what that's used for, or is there plenty of space? I'm just wondering that when you have events at this place, I don't know it, so I don't frequent it, so I wouldn't know, but I'm just asking whether, you know, what is it congested around there just when there are events on?
Yes, so
And
when there
then-
are larger functions, they have weddings, christenings. It's a very, very large pub, as I say. You know, it has a large capacity. It's been extended a few times, orangery, beer gardens, etc. So it's not a small pub. When they have large functions and events there is an overspill already. So my question is, where are the customers going if the car park is more than halved?
Thank you. Councillor Hinds.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, Councillor Bishop. Just going into what you've said, you've highlighted the main issue, which is a concern across the borough, in my view, regarding traffic management around primary schools. And obviously, a significant factor of that is obviously parents taking the kids to school. Okay, so we're on the same page with that one. In terms of the issue which is central to this, in terms of the loss of a car park, would you concede, I mean, I know I would, if I went to a function where there wasn't appropriate car parking, or I went out for a meet or whatever, I would not choose to go there again, or I would go there through other methods, i.e. public transport, taxi, whatever. So I just take the view that the developer, who is also, I believe, the owner of the pub, must accept and must have forecast that by reducing his car parking, it's obviously going to have an impact on the business. And I just, you know, I'm just saying, like, in terms of the loss of the car park, which is effectively what we're talking about here. I'm just wondering how much of a real impact that has in real terms.
Thanks for that. So yeah, I agree, and agree on the parents' point as well. However, there have been multiple sort of promises to deal with the issue that haven't and should have been forthcoming and should be forthcoming before this sort of space is taken. I would say though it isn't the only. Just to come back to Diane's point, sorry, Councillor Williamson's point. Just on the left of the site there is a residential, total care residential home, and they're concerned. They weren't aware of it, and they're really concerned about the impact
Bishop,
on their
can
residents.
I ask you to answer the question, because I just want to remind members and members of the public that this is about the properties that are, you know, being put forward, being developed. I understand there's concerns around the parking, but parking is not what's in the report at this moment in time. So if you can stick to what's been in the item agenda, sorry, and take it from there, please. Thank you.
Okay, so which particular point was it?
Well, if we go back to the car park, Councillor Bishop, I mean, this is private land. So obviously the owners are under no obligation to let people park from schools, nursing homes or anything there. So it's not like we're talking about the loss of a municipal car park. Like I say, I'm just trying to get, because obviously we've talked about the surrounding, and I agree with you, parking's school runs and such, more should be done by the council in my view. But I'm just, if you could just finite, obviously, down on the impact with the loss of these car parking spaces. And I've said my view is, if I ever went to a function where I couldn't park, or whatever, I wouldn't go there again unless I changed my pattern. So therefore, it would either have a detriment to their business to the point they couldn't run it, or they factored in the car park is of little value in that sense. So I'm asking if you could put your point across to say why that car park, being as it is now, is having a significant release on certain things within the community.
Okay, so the pub isn't owned by the landlord. It's owned by Punch Taverns, which are a chain who own a lot of properties up and down the land, and it's not unusual for them to build on car parks. They have, however, been refused in numerous, very recently in Kent, for where it was deemed not appropriate for this in very similar circumstances, because of not just the lack of the lack of parking, also the overdevelopment within the context of the conservation area. So yeah, and the impact, like I say, of the highway. Any further traffic down that road is frankly inconceivable.
Thank you. Councillor Cosgrove.
It's just a query. I mean, I don't frequent the pub. I know you live in the area. How much noise does actually come from the seating area? The outside seating area?
So, I mean, I've counted the tables in the outside and inside. So I think there is 27 tables inside and 31 outside. A couple at the front, but most of them are in the beer garden and the terrace at the back.
Okay, thank you. We now move on to is it the applicant? Yes. Yeah, we now move on to the applicant, Jeremy Heppel. So again, you'll have 3 minutes and 30 seconds prior. The clerk will inform you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. Thank you for inviting me to address you this evening. I represent the applicant, which, as you've heard, is Punch Taverns. You'll hopefully have seen the briefing note that was sent round to members, which highlights the quality of the scheme being proposed and summarises the key design principles. We've aimed for a very high quality design because, as you've heard, it's a listed building and it's in a conservation area. And your conservation area is satisfied with the plans before you. The site is within the settlement boundary. Development is supported by policies 1, 2 and 3 of the local plan, therefore. It's also in a sustainable location within walking distance of local amenities. The proposal is for three-bedroom family dwellings and the design reflects the local vernacular. It is situated within the conservation area in a listed building. And we have, as I said, designed the scheme, we believe, to a high standard. We've worked with the council in terms of tree replanting, which you've heard about. A number of trees are being taken out, which are mainly Leylandii. They will be replaced on site with native trees, so we think quite an improvement, plus off-site tree planting as well. The key issue here is obviously highways. You'll note that the application is supported by the council's highway officer, who states the proposal is unlikely to have any adverse impact on the existing situation. There are no locally adopted parking standards for public houses, and therefore, as I understand it, this is because the council seeks to encourage greater use of public transport, walking and cycling. The operator considers that the retained number of parking spaces will be sufficient for the scheme, and in the unlikely event of overflow customer parking, we have submitted parking surveys of surrounding streets showing at times when the pub is in use, or likely at peak times, there are plenty of parking spaces available. Now, obviously, you've heard about the local schools, and I can well imagine that those do cause significant issues, but school drop-off and pick-up times are not the same as pub peak times. I would also add that the pub does actually assist the situation because there is an informal arrangement whereby parents can park in the car park, pick kids up, drop them off, etc. So I think Punch are trying to do their best to help with the parking situation, but I understand it is an issue locally. In conclusion, we believe the scheme is designed to a high...
30 seconds left.
Okay, thank you. It's designed to a high standard, meets local planning policies, and has no objections from your own consultees. Therefore, I'd politely invite you to grant permission. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Yep, thank you very much. Does any members have any questions? Yep, Councillor Davis.
Thanks, Chair. Would the applicant, I don't know if admit's the right word for it, or would he agree that in summer peak times at the public house, would it have an impact on the local area with the loss of these car parking spaces?
Yep, Mr. Apple.
Well, as I said, the operator considers the amount of parking that will be retained will be sufficient. I would say that given our parking surveys that were undertaken at that time of year that you've mentioned, showing that, you know, in the evenings when you might expect peak usage of the pub, there is plenty of local parking on the local streets, and obviously the schools are not a factor then. So I think if there is any overflow parking, then it wouldn't be an issue, in my opinion. And as the other councillors said, I think quite rightly, if people don't like the lack of parking, well, then customers won't come anymore.
Thank you. Councillor Ibrahim.
Thank you. Can I just ask about the parking arrangements that you have with the school? Is it a verbal agreement that you have, or is it like a contracted agreement that you have with the school, please?
It's an informal arrangement. There's nothing written down. I mean, there's no arrangement, no formal agreement with the schools or the education authority. Indeed, I'm not sure how really such an arrangement would work, because obviously the parents are changing all the time. So it is an informal arrangement that I think has just, you know, developed over time. There may be something verbal between the landlord and the head teachers. I don't honestly know, but it has continued amicably on both sides, and I think it helps both parties.
Thank you. Councillor Bashforth.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just a question about the £12,000 plus for the trees. I presume that you've fully costed this. You know exactly what the build's going to cost. You know what profits you're going to make. You know all your overheads. Is there any remote chance, or can you tell us tonight, that if you are granted permission, that full amount will be contributed? Can you give us assurance that that is the case, absolutely, this evening?
I'll bring Peter on this before we go to the applicant.
Yeah, that's probably not the quite appropriate question to ask the applicant. Ultimately, the recommendation tonight for you is to approve the application subject to a Section 106 agreement being signed for that contribution. Permission won't be granted without the Section 106 agreement being signed. If a Section 106 agreement is signed, that's a legally binding agreement, and if the development is implemented, they have to pay that amount.
Yeah.
There's no negotiation around that.
Okay, I accept what you said, but we do get occasions, don't we, far more than we'd like, where a contractor will come back and say, I'm sorry, there was unforeseen circumstances, there isn't much money in the project now, and we can't afford to pay what we've said we would.
I'll bring Peter back in on this.
Just to answer that point, no, we don't. If a Section 106 agreement is signed and the development is delivered, they pay, they have to pay. What I think you're referring to is at this stage, prior to application, prior permission being granted, an applicant may say, I can't afford this contribution, it's not viable for the development, and then they go through a separate process. That's not what's happening here. The development has accepted the 106 sum and is shown no willingness to sign a Section 106 agreement for it.
Thank you, Peter. Any further questions? Yeah, Councillor Williamson. Thank you.
I just wonder whether, oh, sorry about that, the objector said about consultation. So can you just confirm that no consultation was done with the residential home or schools, or you asked the applicant asked the schools?
Sorry, Councillor Williamson,
Yeah.
We're on the section of asking the applicant. Or I thought you meant the resident.
No, I said, I'm asking the applicant what the resident said was.
Apologies,
there was
I misheard you.
consultation.
Apologies. I think.
If it was a consultation, I want to ask the applicant whether he knows whether that happened at all, whether there was none, and that was or whether they would be prepared to consult to see what mitigating circumstances there might be to approve this application, but with a caveat.
I'm not aware of any consultation, although it's possible that the tenant of the pub has undertaken, you know, local soundings, but nothing formal that I'm aware of. I think, generally speaking, Punch taverns would, you know, rely on the council's own consultation process. The application has been in for 6 months now, and I think it's only really come to light, perhaps even only tonight with the 10 objections, that there is such a strong feeling. So I think it's fair to say that Punch were not aware of such strong feelings about parking locally. You know, the last 6 months would have been the time to do that had we been aware, but I'm afraid Punch weren't.
Thank you, Mr. Heppel. So we'll move on. Oh, Final question, yep, Councillor Hinds.
Yeah, just a quick note really to the developers representative. I'm all for lobbying, so I appreciate the communication I had by email, which was well presented, I might add. I just thought it went a bit too much when you're posting it to me home address. Do you know what I mean? I'm just giving you some feedback, that's all. And I just hope if this doesn't get passed, I won't be getting phone calls in the middle of the night. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. We'll now move on to the ward councillor, Councillor Al-Hamdani. So there is no time limit, but just bear in mind we have other items on the agenda as well.
I'm not going to take too long. Thank you very much. It's unusual being on this side because I used to be on the planning committee. I am going to try and take you through very clearly that I think there is demonstrable case law which shows that highways as a material factor in this should both be considered and should be used to reject this planning application. So first of all, I'm just going to, as a reminder, my understanding is that the housing land supply for the borough is met under the conditions of the Places for Everyone, which is going through, which has been so far passed by the inspector, so that is not a factor. We don't have particular weight in favour of development caused by that. So I'm just then going to move on to the NPPF and the specific paragraph of the NPPF with regards to highways. So this is the legislation under which this would be allowed or refused. Paragraph 115, development should only be prevented or refused on highways grounds if there would be an unacceptable impact on highway safety or the residual cumulative impacts on the road network would be severe. So what we're discussing here is cumulative impacts being severe. What does that mean? And in this case, so the report in front of you talks about an average of 2 to 3 cars being displaced, which is a factor. However, as discussed, there are many more car parking spaces than that being got rid of. I think from the figures it was either 15 or 17, and someone can clarify. And it is important to consider that while on an average that might be a minimum number of cars that are displaced into the area, if there is an event on, then we are talking about 17 or so cars being displaced. So that is a substantial number of cars. And what's that now? On a regular day, that might not be a major impact. If we are talking about when there is an event on, and if you are talking about a wedding or you are talking about a funeral, then those are quite often when you have daytime events. And the issue with the highways is when in this particular case, is when the schools are coming out. So there is a clear time at which the pub would be using all of those available spaces, and so 17 cars are being displaced. So you shouldn't be considering this from 2 or 3 cars. It should be the main impact. And I'm sure as planning committee members, you will have heard when you're talking about change of use. If a commercial building is not in use currently, and only occasional cars use it, when you consider it being used for residential, the comparison is not with how it is always currently used, the comparison is with how it could be used. So you are encouraged when you're on the planning committee, if it's a commercial property with 20 car parking spaces, only 2 of which are used, that's still 20 car parking spaces, and that's how you should be thinking about it. Okay, so 17 car parking spaces, is that enough to cause a severe impact onto the surrounding highway network? We've discussed there are around 600 children going to 2 schools on a cul-de-sac which goes directly past this car park. The example of the case law I'm going to give is a decision that was upheld to refuse planning application by Bovis Homes and Miller Homes against Cheltenham Council. The inspector said that, and this I think is some of the point that the highways officers were looking to make, whilst I can agree therefore that the development should not need to solve all existing unrelated transport problems, the existing or future in any event situation on a highway network, it is not an unrelated problem which the evaluation of the proposed development ignore. It is a related problem which is highly pertinent to the evaluation of the current appeal proposal. So this is a piece of case law where he's saying the fact that the problems are bad is something you should be considering in this application. He then referred to guidance in Department for Transport Circular 02/2013, paragraph 9, which states, development proposals are likely to be acceptable if they can be accommodated within the existing capacity of a section, link or junction of the strategic road network, or they do not increase demand for use of a section that is already operating at overcapacity levels, taking account of any travel plan, traffic management and or capacity enhancement measures that may be agreed. So this is a inspector examining a case and saying the refusal should be upheld if that junction is already operating over capacity and the proposal is likely to have an impact on that. In this case, this is a proposal in which so between 15 and 17 car parking spaces are being lost. There are perfectly reasonable examples of when they would all be in use at the relevant time and increasing the capacity of an already overcapacity junction. And when I say overcapacity, the council itself is trying to introduce measures in this area. It's subject to a school street scheme, which is hopefully going to go through, but which hasn't yet. The council has acknowledged this is massively overcapacity. So all of the factors which are relevant in this case law are relevant here. There is severe impact going on to an already overcapacity part of the network. There is case law example of developments being turned down for this reason. And for that reason, I think that you should refuse the application completely. I cannot say any other way around it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hamdani, for that impassioned speech. Does any members have questions? Yep, Councillor Hints.
Thank you for that, Councillor. That was very, very informative. Just when you're going back to the case law aspect, I'm not as well read as yourself. Did that relate to 17 cars, more or less?
It related to, so the case in question was for more cars, but if you are asking about the point of the case law, the point of the case law is not to discuss the number of the cars. The point of the case law and the inspector's judgment was, are you increasing use of an overcapacity junction? In this case, it is an overcapacity junction and you are increasing the use of it. So the relevant part of the case law is that.
Thank you. Just to come back in terms of the overcapacity of the junction itself, has that been quantified or is that an opinion?
It depends what you mean by quantified. The council has accepted that work needs to be done to remedy the situation there by virtue of creating a school street scheme. So, yeah.
So the council have acknowledged that they need to implement this scheme to alleviate that issue. Do you accept that if the question is not whether this car parking spaces are lost, but whether the council implement the scheme? Because obviously there's a problem already, isn't there?
There's two separate things there. So one is...
Councillor Hamdan, I feel like we're diverging onto a different matter here, so if we can bring
I
it back
apologise,
to the
yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. If we can bring it back to the application, which is about the proposed 3 dwellings.
Yeah, so like I say, I'm very thankful to the councillor for his wide-ranging synopsis on the subject, but I'm just more focused on these 17 cars and the fact that it's been acknowledged that these 17 car parking spaces are potentially being used by people at the school, you know, parents, and maybe losing them 17 car parking spaces, the parents would actually do the sensible thing and look at other options of getting the children to school.
I would be delighted to respond to that point because I had a note to raise that earlier. The pub formally had an agreement in place with parents to allow parking there. That was withdrawn, to my knowledge, about 3 years ago, and I have no idea why they are saying that that is still the case. The pub has refused parents, so that point is null and void. I would also, if I may also make a point about what else was said incorrectly earlier. The applicant said that they would have carried out more consultation had they been aware of the strength of feeling about highways issues. This application was called in November by myself with regards to highways issues. It was raised with me by the applicant, and I asked them, they asked to have a meeting with me, and I said, I would happily have a meeting with you if it is a public meeting with residents, and they said no.
Thank you. Councillor Hinds will come back. Councillor Bashforth.
Just one final point.
Sorry, Councillor Hinds. We'll move on to Councillor Bashforth. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Sam. So you've quoted a case there, but are we comparing apples with apples here? That's the first question. Really, even if you tell me what the case was, we haven't got time to consider that. We might be looking at completely different things. And earlier on, I think Councillor Bishop, sorry, I was trying to think of your first name and be less formal, said that there was a similar case that was turned down, but it wasn't similar, was it? Because in that case, officers recommended refusal, and there were other issues around it. So again, we're not comparing apples with apples. So I think the point you're trying to make is really interesting, but without being able to consider what it was and what, you know, I really don't know how I personally can take on board what you were saying there. Is it something you can explain in very, very quickly?
So it was a residential application. It was a larger application than the one here. That is not the relevant point. The relevant point was the inspector's judgment on whether this should be considered, whether increased traffic into an overcapacity area should be considered as material in a planning judgment. This is an overcapacity area. There is an increase of traffic into that area. The inspector concluded that that is a material judgment that should be used by planning committees in assessing applications. That is my relevant point. That the thing you are asked to, as a planning committee, give your judgment on is whether there is a material factor in refusing the application. And I am saying that there is case law that an increase of traffic into an overcapacity junction is a material consideration, and this is that.
I think final question from Councillor Hinds. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, Councillor Akhtar. Hanan? Yeah, we're moving on to that section now. So we'll open it up to wider debate and discussion. So any questions for the officers? Councillor Hinds.
Just to the office, planning officers, obviously you've heard Councillor Sam's very, very in-depth analysis of this planning application, and obviously I'm not a planning expert, you're sat there, I'm not. Can you give assurances that what has been highlighted, to the best of your knowledge, that you've been at liberty to consider, you've considered?
I think it's regarding the car parking issues. I'll bring Wendy in that.
Yeah, I mean, do you want to take a few questions first on that matter?
Yeah. Okay, we'll take a few questions. I think we'll have a few questions around parking. So, Councillor Akhtar.
Thank you, Chair. It's a similar question in terms of what Councillor Hamdani has raised around the actual wider network capacity. Is there enough space? Is there enough sort of room to take extra sort of parking onto that network, and will it actually make the actual highways more dangerous for the local community to use? Obviously, we're losing 17 parking spaces and an extra sort of at least another 6 cars if another 3 houses are being built, minimum, I think. So again, that will increase. And will these new properties have on-site parking as well, or not?
Thank you. Any other questions from members? Councillor Davis.
At the moment, I'm open-minded with this one now. Now, when we do the training for planning, we've got a couple of considerations when we turn down an application. They've got to be for good reasons. Now, is this parking a good enough reason? For 2 points. Number one, it might go to appeal, and then we could have charges against us. Or if it's a good reason and we've got good arguments about that, we won't have charges against the council, even though they might not agree with our decision. So does that make sense? You know, how would that work? How would that pan out? Would that be good enough reasons, what Councillor Alam Downey's give us?
Yeah, I'll pass it over to Wendy and Peter. Thank you.
So I'm going to explain how I've assessed the application rather than address each of the issues, and hopefully, though, within my explanation it will address some of the things that have already been raised, if that's okay. So I'm required to assess the impact of 3 dwellings on the wider highway network. The amount of traffic that will be generated by 3 dwellings is minimal, especially if in this instance we're measuring it against what already happens in the area. It won't be noticed at all. Each dwelling will have 2 car parking spaces as well. So there's no additional demand for on-street parking because of the dwellings, and the traffic generation because of the dwellings will be very, very low. It won't be noticeable at all. The loss of car parking spaces, so I've got to make this assessment against what's included in the MPPF. If a pub was granted permission now, it would be very difficult for us to refuse it if it didn't have any car parking spaces, because we haven't got any parking standards. If this pub, when it was granted permission, had to have a certain amount of car parking spaces, which is very unlikely because of how old it is, and they were reduced, they could apply for planning permission to reduce the number of spaces. And again, I couldn't recommend refusal for the reduction in the spaces because we haven't got any standards. And by reducing the number of spaces, you're you're reducing the number of vehicular movements actually to that site. So that's also how I have to think. Just let me look at my notes that I've made. So one of the things that have been discussed tonight is we're increasing the amount of traffic in the area the introduction of the 3 dwellings is increasing the amount of traffic in the area. It isn't significantly, which is in the MPPF. So there'll be no significant additional amount of traffic that will have a severe impact on the local highway network as a result of the 3 dwellings, and that's how I've had to assess it.
Thank you, Wendy. I'll bring Peter in.
So, just to add to what Wendy said and to address some of the particular questions that have been raised, I think first of all, in terms of obviously Councillor Hamdani, appreciate the research you've done and what you've looked into in there. I would hold a slightly different view in terms of the case law, in the sense of I would say you're correct in the sense of it is about assessing, is there an additional impact on a stretch of highway or a network and what have you. Ultimately, as Wendy has said, because of 3 additional dwellings, we cannot say there is going to be a severe additional impact, and we cannot say that, and we cannot require a development to fix existing issues. So, and I know you didn't say that, but I'm just saying that's as an added thing. So I think we have to be very careful. We have to be clear that there is a severe impact on the road network because of this development. And ultimately, in terms of what's before us, in terms of 3 additional dwellings and the reduction in the car parking, we cannot conclude that would be the case. So to answer, therefore, Councillor Davis's question, in terms of if there was to be a reasonable reason for refusal in this case, obviously if we felt there was a reason for refusal, we would have recommended that. So as officers, I can't say that we do. Can I say whether the nature of a reason for refusal on this basis would generate costs or not? It's very difficult for me to say. Obviously there is case law, as Councillor Hamdani has pointed out. There are other examples. It is an issue that is debatable, but ultimately, it's not just about the cost. Obviously, it's about as a council we want to make the right decision in planning terms, and so our planning officer recommendation and our highway officer recommendation is that there is not enough to justify a reason for refusal on highways grounds.
Thank you for that clarification. Do any members have any further questions or comments, or it's open for discussion? Yeah, Hazel. Yeah, thank you.
Mine's actually just a comment, not a question. I can't see that building houses in pub car parks, particularly very large pubs that have events on regularly, is a good idea. I propose that we reject this application on the point of nuisance to the residents, because I just can't see how anybody can think building 3 houses in a pub car park is acceptable. Thank you.
So a proposal has been put forward for refusal. Yeah, and Councillor Gloucester, can I ask for clarification on the reasons for refusal? Thank you.
Yeah, it's just nuisance, isn't it? It's not in keeping with the pub, which is a listed building. They aren't going to look like listed properties, are they, when they're built? So it's basically not in keeping with the street scene or the surrounding area.
So are you seconding that refusal, or is it a point of?
Yes, Chair, thanks. I'll second that, and also to add in there, the impact on the local residents with the loss of parking, what this is going to create.
Thank you. I'd just like to remind members, for each reason given, there will be, obviously if it goes to appeals, then there is a cost associated with that, so what's that term? Sorry, I forgot that term.
Potentially a cost if the appellant is successful and wishes to claim for costs. But obviously, that, as we said earlier, that depends upon the nature of the reason for refusal and how defendable it is.
Thank you, Peter. So it's been, Alan, do you want to come in on that? Thank you.
Just to remind members, say, if you're going to refuse the application against officer recommendation, you must do so for valid planning reasons, and as you've heard, in the event of an appeal, you will be required to substantiate each of the grounds for refusal with evidence, because if you don't, there is a risk that the council will be deemed to have acted unreasonably and costs could be awarded against the council. So you do need to make sure that there is evidence to substantiate the points that you're making for refusal. Thank you.
Councillor Bashford.
Yeah, sorry, I've heard what the colleagues have said, and I'm really uncomfortable with building on a pub car, especially a large, very popular, and it's a lovely pub. I've not been in it for ages, but it really is a nice pub. And it could well frighten customers away, you know, and lead to a loss of trade and the ultimate demise of the pub. But somehow I don't see that happening. I agree with what Wendy says about 3 cars isn't going to have any impact on the surrounding, but the loss of those car parking spaces is troubling me. And I know full well that the owner, Punch Taverns, whoever, could just turn around and say, nobody uses that pub car park through the day, because I know a local pub of mine that's done that to stop, you know, people using it through the day. So I don't see how we can factor in the loss of that car park as a reason to refusal. And looking at the houses, Hazel said they don't fit in. I've seen the pictures of them. They do look quite in that vernacular, you know, in that style. So I'm struggling there of how we can, you know, we could justify a refusal. I know what you've said about nuisance, Hazel, but if somebody buys a pub there, a house next to a pub, I'm not sure how they can legitimately, they will complain, I'm absolutely certain they will, but how they could, you know, cause any problems to the pub afterwards, I don't know. I think it's a bad idea. I'm just going to listen to a bit more debate. I'm just sort of speaking aloud to try and get a grip of it, if you know. Thank you, Chair.
I'll pass it to Peter, then Councillor Hinds afterwards.
Thank you, Chair. And I think Councillor Bashforth's comments are a timely point for me to come in terms of the proposed reasons for refusal in what's been put forward. So I think, you know, after I have to be very clear with you in terms of my advice on those two reasons for refusal. So I've got them down as ultimately not in keeping with the surrounding area in terms of, I took the impression Councillor Gostat was around the heritage impact and therefore the impact on the neighbours and what have you in the area in that sense. I would be very concerned about that reason for refusal for the same reasons that Councillor Bashforth has just set out in terms of the design of the development is not harming the conservation area. It is not harming the listed building that is the pub. It has been done very sensitively. And so I don't think it's relevant to try and say that the development would harm the surrounding area in that way. It's not that it's not in keeping with the surrounding area. There's plenty of residential development around the pub already, as we know, and so this is again, it's houses, but fitting in terms of their design. And likewise, it wasn't part of the reason for refusal, but it has come up tonight a couple of times again in terms of noise. There are already residents living close to the pub, close to the beer garden, and obviously when developments come after the pub, in this case, of the 3 new dwellings, you know, there's a basis there in terms of what's been said. They know what they're buying. They're buying a house near a pub, but also, you know, from the planning point of view, there was a principle in play there that the pub was there first, and that's you can't expect the pub to mitigate for any noise issues in the future. I think in terms of the second reason for refusal, we have gone over that quite a bit, obviously. Again, so I just want to reiterate in terms of the impact of the loss of parking. From an officer point of view, we've made our views very clear. We do not feel that the impact of the loss of the car parking would be severe in the extent of how it impacts on the local road network in terms of the context of the existing issues. I'm not arguing the fact that at school pick-up and drop-off times, there are severe issues on that road. Not arguing with that. That's why we're looking at things like a school street in the area. But it's the question of whether this development makes that worse. And ultimately, our advice and our recommendation is that it does not make that worse. And so, from my point of view, that's not a reason for refusal that we would recommend.
Councillor Hinds.
Thank you. I'd just like to voice my opinion on this is obviously any development in anybody's area which can be perceived to affecting them is important, and I think it's important residents' voices are heard. I've always said that, and I'm disappointed there's not been the consultation done with residents, although that's not grounds in itself for rejecting this. Another big factor for me is obviously we protect our heritage. This is a Grade 2 listed building. I think we've had examples in here recently where the planning committee has voted in favour of demolishing them previously, but for me this one is being saved in that respect, and what effect that has on the pub in terms of losing these car parking spaces. It doesn't affect the fact that that's a Grade 2 listed building with afforded protection. And the last thing I just wanted to bring up really is the integrity of the planning committee, because I'm new to it, and I just want to say, do you like that, Hazel? I'll if you just want me to finish, I'll elaborate for the benefit of yourself and others. Yeah, we're looking at the development basically of 3 residential properties with on-site car parking, replacing 17 car parking spaces which are used periodically. And before this planning committee, there's been, in my view, at the very least, there's been far more applications which have had far more impact, in my view and others, on residents. And I've been told by members behind me and whatever, I've been educated rather, that sentiment and feeling cannot come into it. So, You know, we've talked about HMOs in the past, we've talked about this, that and the other. And I feel if we stand against this, with the facing the threat of, as the planning officer's confirmed, a likelihood of losing and incurring costs, what does that say to them people who we turned round to and said, we will not take this further and make a stand on the issue that affected you? So for me, I'm fully prepared to take the advice of the expert, which is the planning officer, and I'll be voting to approve. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Councillor Hinds. I'll take a last point, but before that, I'll go to Peter.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, just one further point, just that something Councillor Hinds reminded me that I do want to clarify. Obviously, there's been talk about the consultation and the engagement this evening. So, first of all, in terms of the applicant, they're under no obligation to consult in terms of this scale of application. So, it's not relevant to hold that against them in terms of deciding the application. In terms of what the council has done, just to be clear, again, Sophie did mention it in our presentation earlier, but there was a public notice up from September on the site, on a lamppost adjacent to the site, adjacent to the car park. 37 neighbours were sent a neighbour notification letter, and there was a press notice. So, in terms of what we are required to do as a council, we've gone beyond what is set out in national legislation, and we have met what we say we will do in our statement of community involvement in that sense. So, again, we've got to be careful that we don't seek to do more than we would do for every other application. We have to treat each application the same in terms of that engagement and consultation, and what we have done is in line with our own statement of community involvement.
Thank you. I'll take one final question from Councillor Davies before we move to the vote. Thank you.
It's not a question, Chair, it's just to make a couple of points here. I do agree that this is very close, whether you vote either way. But I still would recommend that anybody refuse this application, because them parking spaces are going to have effect on the people who live in those houses, the local residents. And imagine it, you know, you come home and you can't, you've got parking in your area, you can't park near your own home and things like that. I think it's definitely going to have an impact on the residents.
Thank you, Councillor Davies. Again, I'm just minded that we've had a move for refusal and seconded, and if it is the case that members approve the refusal, then we do need a member of the committee to defend it at appeal. So just, thank you. Okay, so all those in favour of refusal of the planning application? Against the refusal? Abstentions? That falls. So now we move to the recommendation, which is to approve the application. Yep, Councillor Hinds moved. Does anyone second? Yep, Councillor Iqbal to second. Okay, all those in favour of the application? All those against? Abstentions? Sorry, was Councillor Fry, was that against? Yeah, okay, that's fine. Okay, so does that carry? Yeah. Yep, that carries. Thank you very much. Thank you. Councillor Lancaster, yes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. As that item is now concluded, I just wanted to apologise for my own and Councillor Woodvine's late arrival at the meeting. We did leave in ample time from Saddleworth, got stuck in traffic around the Oldham way, so apologies for our late arrival.
I'll get Wendy on the case to see where the traffic
Thank you.
is. Right, we'll have a quick 5-minute comfort break and we'll resume. Thank you. Yep, we'll back up 7:05. Thank you. Welcome back, everybody. We'll move on to item number 7, which is the Findel complex on Greengate, or east of Green.
Thank you, Chair. This is an application for a major development, which is the reason why it's before Planning Committee tonight. The application site, as you say, is located at the southern end of Greengate, just adjacent to the M60 motorway. The border with Manchester City Council's area is just immediately to the opposite side of that junction. You can see from there on the left-hand side, so the existing site is effectively one taken up by long-established industrial buildings on there that have now passed their, should we say, sell-by date in terms of their effectiveness for modern industry, in terms of parking, servicing, etc. The site itself, it fronts onto Greengate, and to the rear of the site is the Manchester-Rochdale railway line runs there, as well as I say previously, the M60 motorway. Established industrial premises lie immediately to the north of the site, and obviously they will be retained. So this is just giving you the access to the site. So there's a signal control junction which serves this site, and also land which is currently vacant on the opposite side of that junction. They then lead on to the frontage of the site, and this is the area at the front of the building itself, so you can see that on the right hand side. This area in itself, it follows the line of the original Greengate before the M60 motorway was built. At the moment it's a cul-de-sac through the site. It's partly adopted and partly private land owned by the developer, or the site owner developer. As you can see in the right-hand view there are a small number of trees on the frontage of the site. There are some other small groups of trees elsewhere on the site, and it's proposed that they would be retained as part of the redevelopment proposals. In terms of prominence, the main prominence of the site, I'm sure many of you have gone past it many times without noticing, is that it immediately joins the motorway boundary. And as you can see, there are existing large industrial buildings on the site. So this is the proposal, and it's to replace the existing premises with 2 new buildings, one of approximately 15,000 square metres, one of 11,000 square metres. One built towards the front of the site, one to the rear, with a central area given over to servicing, and additional car parking areas provided to the north of the site itself. The buildings, again, they're obviously industrial buildings, approximately 15 metres in height, with accommodating office within there as well. The second building, again, a similar arrangement. This is just showing you the proposed site access arrangement, so there'll be some alterations to the junction as it stands at the moment, and members will note that there is a condition within the recommendation which deals with the precise configuration of that and any alterations, for instance, to the traffic signals that will be required. And this is giving you a visualisation of how the site would stand. So the site itself has got an established industrial use. It's allocated within a business employment area on the local plan. In terms of assessment of the transport implications of the site, it's been deemed to be acceptable. In terms of ecology, as I say, the trees on the site will be retained. The buildings have been assessed by an ecologist and are not deemed to be ones which could be used, for instance, by bats. But nevertheless, as part of the proposal, there will be a significant increase in tree planting within the development site in order that it obtains a substantial biodiversity net gain across the site. So it's recommended that the application be approved for the reasons set out in the report, and again within the late list report there are some minor amendments to those to deal with the fact that a separate approval has previously been granted for demolition of the buildings. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any questions for the officer? Councillor Bashford. we've got a system to follow through first. Right, okay, so no questions. Okay, we'll move on to the applicant, Neil Mellon. Apologies if I've said it incorrectly.
No, you're okay.
Correct me if you wish to.
No, it's fine. Thank you, Chair. Good evening, councillors. On behalf of my client, Royal London, I would like to thank the council's officers for their support in this planning application. Members will have seen that their officer has written a very strong and positive report, and we hope that it is evident that the applicant has worked closely with the council and its statutory consultees prior to the submission of and during the course of this planning application. You will note that there are no objections from any consultees or members of the public, so I will keep this brief and simply highlight the main benefits of the scheme before you. The proposals will deliver an employment development on a previously developed site, which is allocated for employment purposes in the council's adopted local plan. The site is located in close proximity to the road network, bus network and passenger railway network, making it a highly sustainable site from an accessibility point of view. The scheme results in a biodiversity net gain of 1,047%. I'll just take a second to let that sink in because this must be a new record. And just to put that into context, the Environment Act, which came into force last week, requires new planning applications to achieve 10% biodiversity net gain. Therefore, what is proposed is significantly more than what is required, which is a real benefit of this scheme. The scheme aims to be a market-leading development in terms of its sustainability credentials. The buildings would incorporate a fabric-first approach, adhering to the most recent building regulations in terms of energy efficiency, and incorporates measures such as solar panels, electrical vehicle charging points, and cycle parking and changing facilities. There are no technical reasons why the site cannot be developed in the manner proposed, and the applicant has a track record of delivering similar developments in Oldham and the North West. Finally, in these difficult economic times, it's important to mention job creation. It is estimated that this development will create at least 70 jobs during the construction phase, 250 jobs once the scheme is operational, and 50 indirect jobs linked to the supply chain spending and expenditure of workers. In summary, this is a scheme that has clearly been shown to be compliant with the provisions of the development plan, and those material considerations identified also support the proposed development, and I therefore respectfully request that you support your officer's recommendation and approve this application. Thank you for your time, and I'd welcome any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for the applicant? Oh, okay, thank you. So we open it for wider discussion. Councillor Davis.
Thanks, Chair. It's all been recommended by Councillor Bashforth. I'd like to second that, as recommended by the officers.
Thank you.
Can I also say, by the way, we seem to get a hell of a lot of developments for residential premises, and it's great because these people have got to work somewhere, so this is going to be good quality, you know, I was going to say accommodation, but good quality premises for people who are going to run businesses in North Manchester. It's, you know, all the Oldham part of North Manchester, so I think, you know, it's a great development.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. So it's been formally moved and seconded, so we'll move to a vote. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. That passes. Thank you. And final item on the agenda is the former Snipe Inn. I'll pass it to the officer. Thank you.
You know, I'm getting on a bit, Councillor, you know, give me time, I have to change these over.
Right, whilst that's getting done, we'll jump to the appeals. So no pressure, Graham. But we can move on to the appeals. So is then we'll go to the appeals. Well, yeah.
So,
yeah, Peter.
Yeah, it's just to note the appeals update as usual in terms of the results we've had from appeals recently. So, and particularly obviously there's some new appeals that have come in on that date. So, just for you to note, really.
Is that noted by members? Any questions on that? No. Thank you. Right, on to the item then.
Right, thank you, Chair. As you say, this is an application put in by the council itself for the demolition of the existing Snipe public house on Henshaw Street and for the replacement of the site for it to be redeveloped as public realm. That's part of the wider improvements which are proposed to the town centre. So again, this is the site itself. You can see obviously we're not so far away to the west of this. I think I could describe it, members will know that, I'm assuming members will know the site very well indeed. The site opposite the entrance effectively to the Tommyfield market area. So on the left hand side, this is the existing frontage of the Snipe Public House. And, and the right hand side you've got the rear element to it. So from the right hand side, as you can see from the path there and the existing taxi ranks at the back of the site, but also this is a quite well used access way from people, particularly coming out of the bus station, to get through to the town centre. Unfortunately, once they get a little bit further down, they're confronted with a narrow passageway, which certainly during some of the recent weather has been waterlogged in places going through there. So it will link through to the improved elements of the town centre, and particularly the linear park that flows through from that, and it will make it a much more amenable approach for people through the town centre. The picture on the right hand side shows you the existing buildings within the town centre to the immediate south of the site. Now both the Snipe building itself and this block and the block which I'll show you slightly to the north are within the conservation area. So obviously special consideration has to be given to the impact, particularly first of all of the demolition of the public house building, and secondly of the impact on the character conservation area of the proposals for the replacement public realm within those areas. In terms of the buildings to the south of the site, as you can see, obviously they're modern shop fronts, but people know them, they're buildings with decoration on them. They have various features on them that give them some distinction, and obviously they will be retained as part of following through from the development scheme. Immediately to the north of the site, the buildings themselves are more modern appearance, and less in terms of aesthetic appeal to them. The Snipe itself does have some architectural appeal to it, but as a building it's been subject to deterioration. There is a structural assessment which has been submitted as part of the application which indicates that although it would be capable of being retained, there would be significant costs in achieving that. You can see the second picture again, as you will know, that's the Tommyfield market as it stands at the moment, which is directly opposite the site. Now what is important is obviously the first elements of landscaping, improved landscaping that's taken place on Albion Street at the moment, and many of the features which are shown on this will be continued. So this kind of informal seating areas and so on, landscaping will be continued through from the proposed site. So the site itself, from the image you can see the kind of rectangle on the left hand side effectively covering the footprint of the existing building itself, so that obviously will be cleared, and then through from that you'll see that there's a mix of hard and soft landscaping areas, and obviously seating areas that will be put in there as well, and obviously the opportunity for people to obviously linger in the area as well and appreciate it rather than it just being somewhere to pass through to the town centre. And this again just shows you a bit of colour so you can see some of the additional greenery that were put in place within as part of the scheme. And I think this is effectively the kind of important image. Obviously the top one again shows you the approach. You get off a bus at the bus station and head through to the town centre. This is the approach that you're currently confronted with, and the bottom image obviously is the approach that you will be confronted with afterwards. So as I say, there are a couple of important issues. The main ones are to do with the heritage value of the site and conservation area. The building itself is not a listed building that's to be demolished, but it is considered that the proposals would improve the character of the area and allow for greater appreciation of people passing through the area itself. There are clearly improvements in public safety from the removal of the narrow passageway on there, and as I say, generally the attractiveness of the area. And also it clearly forms part of the wider regeneration proposals for the town centre that obviously we all want to see cut forward. So the application recommended for approval, subject to the conditions in the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any questions for the officer? Councillor Cosgrove.
It's just a query. The artwork that's actually in the Ginnell, it's been mesmerising kids for a long time. Is there any ideas of moving it anywhere else?
I think that's probably a good question to ask the applicant when they speak.
Any further questions? We'll move on to the applicant then. Alex Shaw. So you have 3 minutes, 30 seconds prior, you'll get a notification. Thank you.
Good evening, thank you everyone. I don't necessarily have a speech prepared. Hopefully the application is enough to be able to convince people that the proposals are recommended, but I'll be happy to take any questions from anyone. Thank you.
Councillor Cosgrove.
Can you answer the question about the artwork?
Of course. Yes, so we're aware that the artwork, the Light Squeeze as it is known, is a piece of artwork that has fallen into a bit of disrepair. We need to retrieve that. We need to then assess what that's going to look like in terms of what the repairs are required, and we are looking at other opportunities across the town centre and the other public realm areas to rehome that.
Thank you. Is that an offer for Stoneleigh Park to take it? Yeah. Any further questions for the officer? No. Okay, I'll open up for wider discussion. You move for approval? Can I have someone second that? Yep. Councillor Williamson. So, all those in favour? Against? Abstentions? That passes. And that concludes tonight's meeting. Thank you very much, everybody.